wondering if there's something in your child's body that is keeping them feeling stuck. So many parents can be concerned about their child's development, and there's so many different ways that that can go. And one very fundamental way is around your neurological development. I know in my former life, working in research and development for a battery company, I learned to try to look for what's the deep answers of what's really going on here. And so this is one area that I'm really passionate about, is really understanding what's going on in the body for development. My name's Veronica, founder of ADHD What Now, and I'm so excited to welcome Sonia Story here today. And she is going to share with us 3 key areas that can be keeping your child's body stuck with ADHD symptoms. So welcome, Sonia. So great to have you here today.
Thank you, Veronica. I'm super happy to share and super happy that we're here getting the word out. Just before we kind of started the recording, one of Veronica's things that she was saying was, I really want parents to know that this can help. And I completely agree. And it's so hopeful to know that many other parents and therapists have been using this, and it does help. And it not only helps, but for some children, they're losing their diagnosis. And this is actually confirmed from my mentor, who's a psychiatrist. And he would give movements instead of medication and help children resolve their ADHD symptoms that way. So you asked for 3 keys. I know we don't have a lot of time. I'll just get right into it if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the keys is whether or not the body can produce a smooth rhythmic movement. So there are particular movements that we teach in the Brain and Sensory Foundations course. They're innate movements. That means babies will do them spontaneously in the womb and very early infancy, well before crawling, and throughout. They're designed to be done throughout life. But and that would be like walking. So as long as you have proper posture, gait, and alignment, you're walking. Again, as long as it's developed properly, which for a lot of children it's not, that will keep the brain active and mature and happy and able to function well and able to focus. But the foundation for that is laid in very early infancy. And it's laid with these rhythmic movements that babies will do as long as they're healthy, not stressed, and as long as they have room to move. Unfortunately, what has been happening so much since probably the early 90s, maybe mid 80s on, is that more and more children are being hindered in very early womb life and infancy. And so they're not getting this full repertoire that would develop their brain maturity, develop their ability to focus, develop all the connections between the brain and the body and the sensory system that need to happen for learning to be easy, for focus to be easy, and for controlling impulses to be easy. And a lot of parents and even therapists don't know that one of the reasons children are hyperactive is because their brain is not mature enough to be still. And so that's what these movements do. They directly mature the brain, the body, the sensory system. The whole neurosensory motor system is all tied in as one functioning unit. And so we can impact that. That's the beauty of this, is that we can impact it later in life. So one key is the rhythmic movements. And I'll just note, for parents who are interested in research, recent research came out showing that when a child has atypical rhythm, in other words, they can't produce a smooth flowing rhythm in their body and maintain the beat, and it's linked to developmental coordination disorders. It's linked to challenges with speech and communication. It's linked to challenges with focus and attention. And so then there is even other research that says when we give rhythmic movements and we, especially these innate rhythmic movements, and we help the child to produce that, then they are able to function and learn so much better. So that's the rhythmic movement piece. And then there are
Can I ask
also,
one question there?
oh, sure, sure.
Okay.
Yes.
So in my experience, for example, I started looking into all of this because I have twins, and their development had just different, like, I don't know if they're red flags, but things that were challenging. So for example, the girl, my daughter, she had needed help in every single major motor system of her body: gross motor, fine motor, visual motor, oral motor, everything. And the boy has then attention challenges, right? ADHD, my
Yeah.
son. So you were mentioning that these rhythmic movements start in the womb. So how can that be like almost interrupted even that early? And could that be what was going on for my twins?
Yes, it can be interrupted early. Unfortunately, it can be interrupted by electromagnetic frequencies. It can be interrupted by ultrasound. If you dig deeper into the research, those things, even though it's not really well known, those things are problematic. They produce, let's just put it this way, they produce stress for the system. Yeah, sometimes they call it oxidative stress because the actual cell membranes are changing in response to those inputs like ultrasound and EMS. So that's only one of many. As each generation goes by, we have more and more toxicity in our bodies, more heavy metals, more pesticides, more herbicides. Um, Especially here in the United States, this is like the food production is pretty much it's the highest poisoned food production in any country. So it's really challenging to get clean food. There are problems with plastics. I mean, it just kind of goes on and on. So it's hard. It's a hard time. And then there are things too that we do culturally that aren't so great, like some of our birthing practices can wreak havoc for the baby and this whole movement system. Um, some of our things like putting babies in carriers instead of, they should be on their belly way more than they are because that promotes development and those kinds of things. Yeah, it's hard to talk about it because it's so depressing, but we can go back. That's the thing. If they missed it in the womb life or infancy, we can go back and put the actual very specific targeted movements in to the body. And then the body goes, oh, I know what to do with this. And then the brain gets much more mature and much happier. And the child gets more mature and happy and able to focus and learn and that kind of thing. Does
Thank
that
you.
make sense?
Absolutely. And yeah, I appreciate the details that you shared.
Yeah.
And I definitely was in the boat of feeling a little bit sad that, like, culturally
True.
speaking, that I wasn't aware of these things in advance.
Right.
And so I kind of followed along the beaten path, so to speak. But I love the message that you have of that it is completely possible that the
Yeah.
body can experience and click and say, take off from there and go and not actually miss anything. So yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so that's the hopeful part of it. And it's, to me, it's this awesome system that humanity is given, this gift of these innate movements, because we're seeing that they work for the entire age span. So if you have elderly parents or aches and pains yourself, I've had so many moms say, oh yeah, I've got all this tension and now it's much better, or my posture's better, or my backache's gone. And it's a fantastic set of tools for the entire lifespan. So let me get to the second
Yeah.
key. The second key would be the innate reflex movement. So there are primitive and postural reflexes. And basically, a reflex is an automatic movement that is hardwired into our brain. And the primitive and postural reflexes are meant to be used in infancy. And then, at least with primitive reflexes, they should be eventually they should get used and repeated over and over so that because they promote development. But the funny thing about these is that if they're not used when they should be used, then they end up kind of getting locked in the body, and they tie body parts together and they leave the brain in a state where it's less mature. So they're meant to go through a life cycle, the primitive reflexes, and then go dormant. If they don't go dormant, they're they're keeping a child in a stuck state. That's the easiest way I can explain it. So, for example, um, one of the reflexes, this is one that everyone will understand. So if a reflex is an automatic movement, but it's stimulated by a sensory input. I forgot to say that. So the stimulus for this reflex is just a tactile input or touch here. And then the baby will do this. Almost everybody has seen little babies grab onto a finger. It's super sweet. And that is meant to do many things. It develops the muscles in the hand. It helps the pathways between the hand nerves and the brain. And it gets you ready to do things later like this and this, which is the beginning of counting, right? And the beginning of using tools. But if you're stuck here, then you have this kind of primitive way of grasping, and everything is stuck together, like the body parts are stuck together, so you don't get this differentiation. That happens all throughout the body, depending on which one of these movements you're using. Many of them have to do with our head turning or going different ways, or the body moving. And if they're not integrated, then you're stuck in primitive patterns, basically. And you're not only stuck in primitive patterns, but you may be stuck in fight or flight, because some of these very early responses, like the startle that babies do, I don't know, people might be familiar with that. That is a fight or flight type of response. And so if that stays, it's meant to be the ideal, or the most, what we would think of as healthy development, shows that that response starts to wane early. Like it should be completely extinguished by 4 months. It starts to wane, or maybe even 2 months. There's, some debate on that, but between 2 and 4 months, that should go away. And the baby should have learned and got enough input that they're safe. They don't have to startle with different sensory input. And that is a more mature state of mind. Of course, we always want to have an emergency response if we need one, and the brain doesn't forget how to do that. But for general daily living, if it's not an emergency, the nervous system should be calm. The brain should be, we should be able to access the front parts of the brain. The reflexes, the primitive reflexes, are housed in the brainstem. So it's very challenging for a child, if they did not get this development, to be able to function. It's not just even about focusing from the head, but even the body is so uncomfortable if the proper development has not taken place. And so these reflex movements are things that we want to use and develop and repeat, just like we would in infancy. And then the brain gets the maturity it needs and the sensory processing maturity that it needs, and then it can function. And that's actually the third key, would be sensory processing. You have to have that comfort and being comfortable in your own skin, being able to be upright, free of tension, being able to be still and focused. Those are all brain maturity components. And in addition to that, there's where, when you get this physical system built, then, and the sensory system built, then there's social emotional growth that happens, just like you would see in normal development. Like you would not expect a toddler to be in control of his emotions, right? But once they develop, they start getting more and more control of their emotions. And that's exactly what we see when we start giving these movements to children. That's one of the first things. Better sleep and better emotional control are the two first things that parents will report. and they're so relieved, right? Because like, oh, now I can talk to him without him having a meltdown, or now she's able to reason and listen and converse with me about something as opposed to just having a tantrum or something like that. So that's the beauty of these movements, is that they really deeply, and you mentioned that word deep in your introduction. I love that because it's deep work to turn around the situation from the inside out. It's not like putting things on the outside in to make a change. It's like changing the entire foundation so that functioning is so much more easy and comfortable. And that's my goal, is to help children find their happiness and success with what's meaningful for them. So,
And that's why I love the work that you do, because think about it, without addressing at that level, then you say stay at this upper level and keep on continuously experiencing not as much success as you would otherwise, I'd say, but kids can feel really unsuccessful when the reality is all the effort that they're putting in, they really are trying hard, but they're just limited in a certain way that's not going to, they're hitting a ceiling that they could break the ceiling entirely and move forward beyond it. So it's really important. And I think one of the things that I realized along the journey is that the awareness of red flags that are out there, that this type of treatment could help, is not universal, right? That even in terms of that there's variety in occupational therapy, right? Like some occupational therapists might do this type of work, and then there are anyway, you can speak to that because you work with a lot of different occupational therapists, and you've heard as far as the training is concerned. Do you want to address that for a moment?
sure. So, as I was going through my training with Dr. Blomberg, the psychiatrist I mentioned, and with many other world-renowned leaders in this field, I was in courses with a lot of OTs, and I ended up speaking to hundreds of them. And I said, you don't learn this in OT school? And they said, oh no. They said, we learn what a primitive reflex is. We learn how to assess them, but we don't learn what to do about them. So it is a big gap in their education, and they are very aware of it, and they're very open about it. And I love that so many of them are really pursuing the training because they're hearing about it from other OTs who are using it. I had an OT tell me that using these tools that we teach in the Brain and Sensory Foundations course, she said, we see results in 2 months that I used to be happy to get in a year. OTs have told me it's the best thing they've ever found for sensory processing issues and for emotional issues too, like anxiety. And it's so interesting because children they're very different. Like some children might be off the charts capable. And like I saw one boy one time, he was in 6th grade. He was doing math at Stanford University. So he's super smart, genius level math kid. And but he had no control of his body and no control of his emotions. He had so many unintegrated reflexes, and he would whine all the time. And his mom said, I'm really nervous because he's going into 7th grade next year. He had been homeschooling. And she said, I'm nervous because he whines all the time, like, like that kind of thing. And the kids are going to make fun of him. So we did these movements, and he was a completely different kid at the end of the summer. And there was no more whining. He started to be comfortable in his body. And then there are other kids they're like star athletes, but they have ADHD. They can't read their own handwriting, hard for them to read. And even though you would think like, well, they're moving all the time and they're very coordinated when they move. Another little boy, he was 12, he could only move his neck this far. That was his entire range of motion. And what happens when you have these head and neck reflexes, especially that aren't integrated, your body learns to compensate and get really tight in its muscles. And so even though he was a star athlete, he was having so much trouble functioning because one of the things, because these involve our muscles. So when the reflexes are not integrated and you're left in this kind of poor developmental state, your muscles are weaker, which they tend to tense up because they're weak as a compensation, and they don't function as well. So it's just fascinating to me how it all ties together. That's why I said the neurosensory motor system is really one system. And but okay, so to tie it back into what OTs learn, they're mostly focused on this. They understand the importance of movement and vestibular, and they understand the importance of sensory. But what they don't realize, a lot of them, except more and more are starting to, is that the reflex system, the rhythmic movements and reflexes, are foundational for developing the vestibular and the sensory system in the first place. So, but more, like I said, more and more OTs are very aware. And one of the best ways that we've found is for parents to take the course so that they have the tools for themselves and their children and their whole family. And then if they want more support, we give support in the course, but if they want like really hands-on support, they can find an OT that they like. And so many OTs will be like, oh yes, I'll take that course. I'll take it with you. And then everybody wins. And the OTs are just super happy with the results that they're getting. And we have over 110 case studies now on our website. And I hope parents will go and read some of them. There's a whole index where you can find case studies specific to ADHD or anxiety or sensory processing, that kind of thing.
Awesome. And we would find that where exactly?
The website is Move, Play, Thrive. And then if you go to the case studies section, there's a link saying, here's the index, if you want to look up specific categories.
Okay, awesome. We'll link to moveplaythrive.com in the show notes. And also you have a list that could essentially be red flags. Is that correct? So I find that like really, really a valuable idea. I was going to ask you, what are some red flags? But as I understand, you have that all written out for us already. And so where would we find that?
Yes, that is, well, I'll give a link, and it's a wonderful resource. And some other red flags we haven't really talked about is whether or not the child can balance easily, whether or not they seem comfortable in their body, whether they have good posture. All those things relate to whether or not these movements were able to do their job in infancy. But once a child is up and walking, this is something Dr. Blomberg used to say. He used to say, once a child is up and walking, you don't think to go back and look at these movement patterns, because you think, okay, they did their development, but it's there's a lot of gaps. Like, children can learn to get up and walk, yes, and so they do have some integration, but like you said earlier, there is so much more effort that they have to give just to maintain sitting in a seat or at a desk, and it really does interfere. And these kids are bright. They're so bright, and they're sensitive. They've got these huge hearts, and they are just struggling with physical body and brain body sensory connections that we really can impact in a huge way.
So it's almost like uneven development in and of itself would be a red flag to potentially consider.
Sure. Yeah. Children who didn't crawl, or when they crawled, it was asymmetrical. Children who, they're not sleeping well, that fight or flight could still be on. If they're really irritable or sensitive, that's a sign that the sensory system is immature, brain is immature. So there's so much we can do.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for being here, taking the time to share some of that and share some of the stories. So definitely go check out the case studies at moveplaythrive.com and find the link down below to access that red flag list, because it connects it back to some of the primitive reflexes, right?
Oh yeah, they're all connected with primitive reflexes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and give some further understanding. So thank you for putting that work together and being a part of increasing awareness in this area. And I think that it's, I mean, just as a side note, I think it's an area that's growing in awareness and understanding, because as I was reading even Ned Howell's book, ADHD 2.0, which just came out, there are comments, or he mentions in there, movement activities that were done to help children with ADHD, and in listening to some other professionals in the area of ADHD, same thing. So I think it's starting to creep up more and more. And thank you for being a part of that, and making resources available directly to parents, even, that they can choose to utilize at home to help in this area. And I know you're a critical element in training OTs as well in this area. So thank you for your work. Thank you for being here. And definitely everybody go check out moveplaythrive.com.
Thanks, Veronica.
Bye-bye.